The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hi, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar on Smart 2023 IT Budgeting, Tips to Get What You Need. We are going to be covering a number of interesting topics. If we can move to the next slide, I can share some housekeeping tips with you, as well as a little bit extra about DataPrize. So for those of you who do not know us, DataPrize has been around for a number of years, but more interestingly, our goal is to provide technology solutions that help drive our customers' businesses forward. And we do that by providing a broad portfolio of services, from cybersecurity to managed user, to field services, to a whole host of other award-winning solutions. And as part of that, we also act as a consultant and IT advisor to many of our clients. And part of the conversation we're going to be having today drills into a component of that and how we guide our clients. So next, let me introduce myself, Mary Beth Hamilton, and then I am joined by Tom Shea, one of our VCIOs here at DataPrize. Tom has been consulting clients for a number of years.
Thank you for leaving it at that.
So we're confident that as part of this conversation, we can give you some good advice and guidance to address moving forward as you go into 2023 budgeting. And then beyond that, if you have additional questions, please feel free to reach out to post-webinar, but fear not, during the webinar, we will also take questions from any attendees. So next, let's review the agenda. So the topics that we're going to cover are, first, very high level, the impact of economic trends on the IT budgeting process. We're going to talk a little bit about foundational components of the IT budgeting process, what you need to be doing to be building out that blueprint and plan moving forward. But then more importantly, potentially, of how you optimize your IT budget, what you need to be looking at on how your company's evolving, how your IT needs to evolve to support that, and what implications that has on the investment you make in your IT. And then, we'll wrap it up with recognizing that there are multiple stakeholders and business leaders that you need to sell your budget to. So some tips and commentary on how you can do that and negotiate the most effective IT budget for your business. So next, we will jump into a number of topics. There we go. I was waiting for the slides to switch. I apologize. Economic trends. So with that, we've outlined here 3 buckets. Tom, do you want to take us through these and what, how they're impacting budgets and what you're seeing?
Yeah, absolutely. So obviously, recession is a main topic right now that is on kind of the tip of everybody's tongue, and there's certainly concerns with a potential or impending recession. As stated here, about half the CFOs that have been asked about have said that they feel a recession is coming next year. So we're going to talk a little bit about, as we go through, you could almost say recession proofing your IT budget coming for 2023. Included in that too is obviously inflation and the potential cause of the recession, as well as rising supply chain costs. However, with the rise in the interest rates, actually that's kind of putting a bit of an ease on the supply chain, not the costs, unfortunately, but the fact that actually the kind of delays that have been experienced recently with the supply chain, that should kind of ease up a bit coming up in 2023 with the rise in the interest rate. So that'll be something that we'll bring up as well later on. To that end, though, there are numerous IT decision makers that are using this opportunity to actually increase their IT budget. This is a great time if you haven't already made some of the moves you were thinking about and some of the things that we're going to talk about later on. This is the time actually to make those moves and kind of spearhead those projects to give you the necessary flexibility coming up in a potential recession time.
Perfect. So let's get into the next portions, which is building the budgeting foundation. And so moving right ahead into what that process looks like, we've outlined it here into sort of 6 different steps, with that first one of calculating current costs. So, the first thing is to understand what your existing baseline looks like, what your budget is, and this includes expenses to date, as well as where you'll end with your year-end forecasts. It's also really important to take into account pricing changes that may be coming from your vendors and how those will impact your going forward budget. And so once you have in total taken a look at where you've been and what your current allocations are, you then need to understand what changes are going to occur. And so from this perspective, you really need to also understand what changes are going to occur within the company and how it's going to impact the IT budget. It's extremely important, and we'll mention this other times, that IT doesn't budget in a bubble, but rather really collaborates with the business, because at the end of the day, the two are so tightly intertwined. Really, IT touches all the elements of the business, and decisions that the business leaders make are going to have a direct impact on the IT budget and vice versa. So you need to understand the business's priorities for the coming year and get answers to questions like, are we adding extra people? Are we adding extra sites? Are we going to be acquiring companies, adding new lines of business? Because each one of these are going to have an impact in how you build the budget, how you prioritize the investments, and how you partner with other business leaders across the organization. So once you've taken that into account and understand how IT will be supporting the business, the next thing is to start building those estimates. And this is where you start scoping the budget, identifying cost savings opportunities. Those cost savings opportunities are particularly going to come into play as you're going through the negotiation process with other leaders in the business to help them understand that you're optimizing the investments that you're making from an IT perspective in order to fund and enable other aspects within the company. You'll also want to understand changes to current costs, and then costs of projected changes that the business is going to be undertaking. And then from there, you create the budget and take a look at, and whether you submit this in the budget or have it in your back pocket, are the considerations around CapEx versus OpEx, discretionary versus non-discretionary spend, and other constraints that there may be. So you submit the budget and that proposal. Then the selling process begins. It's like what we like to call it. So you're going to be working with the business and other executives to help them understand the rationale behind your business, how it aligns, or the rationale behind your budget, and how it aligns with the business strategy, how it minimizes risks, how you've incorporated cost savings and economies of scale to make room for other strategic or important investments that the business needs to be driven forward. And then, that all comes into the negotiation component of prioritizing projects and getting agreement across the business that this is what we're able to do. This is how we're able to support the business based on the dollars that we have available and what the trade-offs may be if you don't make certain investments. And then, once you've gone through that, closed any gaps, ensured that you're aligned, then it comes down to that final approvals component, right? Of understanding what additional changes may need to be made and what that final baseline that you're going into the subsequent year is, as well as, what may change, and that may bring you back to the room to have another conversation of how you need to evolve the budget. So we've talked a little bit about the budgeting process. Next, wanted to briefly cover sort of those expense categories, and Tom will touch on these as we go deeper into the conversation, but just understanding at a high level the differences, or that there are differences, right, between CapEx in the budget and that impact on the organization, as well as OpEx, so hosting, cloud, SaaS, etc. type of expenses, and then projects. And Tom's going to touch on the considerations of moving to the cloud. And so a project may be a cloud migration, right, that you need to plan for, and that changes that CapEx, OpEx dynamic. So you need to recognize that each one of these are going to have a play in your budget, and changes such as those can have an impact year over year on how you structure it. So keeping that in mind as you're going into the budgeting process. And then a third point that we wanted to touch on was just sort of giving you a thought on the different ways that you can approach the budgeting process. And each one of these has benefits and trade-offs, and many organizations have to determine independently which one is right for them. But we've outlined 4 here. It's the incremental. You take last year's, you do a simple add-on in some areas, and that gets you to the net of the new year. There are cons, and it doesn't necessarily account for changes or how the company may be evolving. There's the zero-based, and this is you start from scratch, you erase it all. It is time consuming. It may require you to re-justify things that were already given, that the business already supported, but now you need to reevaluate and rebuild the business case for those, as well as then add on top. There's the top down. So management tells you this is your budget, and then you need to go and figure out how you're going to allocate those dollars. The challenge with that is that it doesn't necessarily allow you to align with the business and make sure that those dollars are put in the right places. And then there's the bottom up approach, which begins with the needs of the end users and what they need, and then you build it up. So these are 4 different methodologies that organizations can leverage, and as noted, each has its own benefits and constraints, but we wanted to outline those to sort of help you frame your thinking as you're going through your process. And then next is just 2 additional points, and one is around expense decisions and recognizing trade-offs between discretionary versus non-discretionary, and non-discretionary may not be as much of a trade-off, but understanding, looking for ways to reduce costs around those non-discretionary costs without affecting normal operations, because by doing that you may find more give in your budget, and that's where that cost optimization component comes into play, so that you can invest in some of the what may be viewed as discretionary, but really they're key to driving the business forward. And then the last one we wanted to note was on benchmarking. And we, I think, have 1 or 2 stats in here on benchmarking. But the one caveat is that it's not necessarily suitable for building your budget. These are simply, I would say case studies of one. They're probably case studies of many, but the reality of it is they don't necessarily apply directly to where your organization is in its IT maturity, how it's evolving, what investments need to be made. So they can help you in building the case, but be sure to use your organization as the guiding point and where you need to get to help develop what is the right IT investment that you need to be making today or planning for down the road. So with that foundation set, we'll go over to some of the key areas to prioritize and optimize, and what you need to be thinking about as you're building that foundation. So the first one we have in here, Tom, is looking at software as a service, so SaaS. And we have a couple of bullet points here, but I'm going to turn it over to you to talk through, the implications from the budgeting perspective.
Yeah, so thinking again about those IT directors and their thoughts about utilizing this time to actually increase IT spend, there are a few different areas that many directors mentioned as something that they were looking to do. I think thinking back to pre-pandemic, when the pandemic hit, a lot of directors got caught kind of by surprise and had to quickly come up with ways to assist their remote users as quickly as possible to make sure that everyone was as productive as possible. And so one of the things that got completed right away was like communication software as a service, right? All your Teams and your Zooms got put into place as quickly as possible, but they were kind of caught off guard. So this is an opportunity to put these initiatives that IT directors have been thinking about in place prior to having to worry about them as a need, and more of as a way to get ahead of the curve. So in the instance of software as a service, there's a few bullet points here about how it can assist, but it the ways that you would want to think about software as a service is the first and foremost, obviously, there's a cost component, not just a potential cost savings, but kind of cost reliability, right? Which your CFO is really going to love to hear. And the fact that, again, going back to that CapEx, OpEx kind of model, there's a lot more certainty month to month as to what the costs are going to be for this service as compared to the potential of keeping software in-house. So if you have something on-prem and you're looking to move a third-party application to their cloud, their service, this is going to save you in ways of not having to worry about maintaining your own infrastructure. You're not going to have to worry about licensing for your servers. You're not going to have to worry about update and upkeep, maintenance, staffing that might need to be concerned about these particular servers and what they do. But instead, you're putting all of that onto the third party and their service. And then again, that gives you month-to-month cost certainty. So that's certainly, one of the reasons that we would think that this is one of the things that you would think about as part of this, budgeting exercise. Mentioned here, reliability and security. Security, obviously, it gives the onus on the third party that is, handling this cloud service for you. They're the ones that have to worry more about the security of that service, that software, and your data. So that, kind of eases the burden of security from you in this particular situation on this particular software. Not only reliability, but also scalability is something that, it makes it easier in this kind of software as a service situation. So again, if you have a, let's say, database server for this particular piece of software, your concern then is, will the data that you are housing grow too much with what you own? That scalability is now increased and easier for you to manage when it's put in the hands of the third party and their cloud, because they'll just expand it as necessary for you. And then mentioned here as well, the ease of deployment. So instead of, again, having to staff properly, having to, be the ones that kind of create the infrastructure on-prem, and then making sure that staffing is well trained and deploying it to, your users, that again falls on the third party, the software vendor, and in this case, it's more just a matter of either, a very small agent that's put maybe on the end user devices, or it's just a URL that they have to point to, and that takes care of the deployment for them, and it makes your job as an IT director much easier.
Perfect. So we talked about the sort of the move, why you make the transition. On the next topic, we can talk about prioritizing and optimization. So, you've touched on how it reduces overhead. I think those bottom two are pretty interesting points for organizations that already are utilizing SaaS products. So if you want to talk through those
Yeah, sure.
components?
Absolutely. So, yeah, if you already have something, all right, this is a great time to evaluate it. And, there's the potential, as the bottom point says, to possibly renegotiate that license, that contract, if you already have something in place. Or again, if you don't have it in place, this is the best time to evaluate the pros and cons of what you have on-prem now, as opposed to moving it up to the cloud. And as mentioned prior, I feel that there's numerous reasons, numerous pros, that just takes a lot of things off of your plate as an IT director and puts all the onus on the third party for you, and frees you up, your time up for more important IT business decisions.
Yeah, and on the licensing one, it's certainly this time of year of going through and understanding across the entire organization, because it's not uncommon for individuals to person licenses to tools that the company may already have a corporate set of. So getting a handle of that can enable you to sort of get rid of that sprawl and creep, and also then identify, are you at a new volume level? Are there any additional areas that you can negotiate to right size the spends there? So next, we dive into a topic near and dear of our hearts, cybersecurity.
Right, and as stated right on the top here, roughly 20% of IT budgets have been, devoted to cybersecurity, and obviously, there's numerous reasons. There's a few things mentioned on this slide as well, but I think first and foremost, the need to constantly keep up to date as possible and look into new services or new products to enhance your cybersecurity is because, unfortunately, there's always new threats out there that are of concern to all organizations, not just large, but also mid-size and small as well. I just read about a situation recently. One of the best ways to deal with, that kind of ransomware attack where, an outside hacker or whatever, attacks the data, encrypts the data, and one of the best ways as a defense against that was, instead of obviously paying the ransom and unencrypting the data, was to have data backups. Those would be unencrypted. You could just, wipe away the encrypted data. Yeah, maybe you'd lose, a day's worth of work, but you wouldn't have to pay some exorbitant ransom. Unfortunately now, a new threat that I've been reading about is that these attacks that encrypt the data can be time released. And so they find ways to not only encrypt your production data, but your backup data as well. So point of this is basically just that, there's always new threats out there. There's always, something new that you're going to have to kind of defend against. Security as a whole is somewhat of a reactionary business, but it's becoming more and more proactive with, potential different services and hardware and applications that can be added to your environment to protect it. In the case of this particular threat, anything that you can do to strengthen your barrier so that nothing can get in internally to even start any kind of data encryption process. These are ways to prevent any kind of ransomware and any kind of huge payments that you might have to make. So so one of the reasons, again, to increase your cybersecurity portion of your budget is potential new threats. But also, as your businesses are becoming more and more cloud-based, more and more digital-based, your digital footprint is increasing, up as it says right in the slide. So there's more of a need to protect, your intellectual property, with ways to enhance, your security between yourself and either going back to the first point, software as a service, between yourself and that third party that's, holding your data as well, or, just your environment as a whole. cybersecurity is certainly something that always has to be thought about in that sense. There might be a need to increase your staffing, again, because of how much of an importance cybersecurity is to environments nowadays. You might need more kind of trained staff. It's becoming such an industry now. DataPrize as well has a service specifically geared just towards security, and so these are some of the things that you have to think about. Geopolitical events. We see the things like the war between Russia and Ukraine. This gives a kind of license for more potential for attacks on everyone. So there's always these thoughts of these things that have to be put on the IT director's plate to continue to keep up with cybersecurity. Also, some of the things that you have to think about as an IT director is what not only compliance and regulations do you have now, but what could be coming down the pike to protect yourself from whatever new regulations might be happening because of some of the other things that I just discussed beforehand. So again, if you can get ahead of it instead of doing just the bare minimum of what your regulations might be right now, then you're ahead of the curve. And lastly, what I wanted to add to this was many companies, part of their regulation or just on their own, are including cybersecurity insurance. And anything that can be done to lower your premiums in your cybersecurity insurance is certainly something that should be taken into account as well. So increasing the spend in the cybersecurity area will actually help decrease the spend in cybersecurity insurance.
Yeah, and you raise, and the next one we talk about prioritizing and optimizing. And I think the security one and insurance is particularly important to highlight because it demonstrates the need for IT to be speaking with the business, because we've seen in many cases where budget got approved for items such as MFA or MDM or these other components that are absolutely critical for an organization to have, but it took the cyber insurance company coming back and saying, we're either increasing your premiums tenfold or we're canceling you altogether if you don't have these in place. And they've gotten incredibly strict on what organizations have to have in place because the payouts have gotten so much higher. And so they're protecting themselves. So from a budgeting perspective, it can be work in an organization's favor to understand what their insurance provider may require them to have to help them build a case in the budget for these dollars.
No, you couldn't be more right on that. I've heard from way too many of my clients how that's such a harder and harder thing to work around. It's something IT directors don't really want to be working with, but as you said, it actually could make the case easier when they're talking to their CFOs or whoever's channeling that budget for them. It just gives them a straight guideline. It tells them exactly what they need to do, and if anything isn't completed, this is where they can put in those those potential projects, those new initiatives that we spoke about earlier. That's where this can come into play, and then on top of that, it's just good practice to have as strong a security perimeter as possible.
So other items on here, the effectiveness of the tools. Obviously, one thing about cybersecurity is it's more of a defense in depth. You can't just go out and buy the products that they're touting in the Super Bowl. There are many, many layers that need to be put into place. So I think it's an education component within organizations from those IT leaders having to educate the organization that there is not one solve to this cybersecurity business continuity challenge. It is multiple layers that an organization has to have, and that has implications on budgeting and what level of risks a company is willing to take. You have some other items here that I will stop and let you touch on.
Yeah, no, and actually, I'm glad you mentioned training, because one of the points in here not only talks about ongoing risk assessments, but training as well, right? So we talked a little bit about compliance requirements, the ongoing risk assessments. That's things like maybe pen tests that, if you're not doing them now, you probably should be. But the training is really big. I'm sure that many of the people in the audience now are already working with some sort of organization that's doing those, like kind of fake spam emails and, trying to let the client, let their users see, what potentially is out there that could be, a threat. And if the user mistakenly hits something that they shouldn't, usually a 5-minute video comes up. And the more those, even though it's 5 minutes here, 5 minutes there, the more that those come up, the more that just, you just learn a little bit more. Maybe most of it, but there's usually something in there that you didn't know. And it sparks, just something to then continue to protect your environment. So these training solutions that are out there are an excellent, effective way to continue to secure your environment. So that you mentioned training in another way, but that brought up that bullet point. I think it's very, very important to if that's one of the initiatives within the cybersecurity realm that you're looking at, employee training is one of the best defenses.
And maybe you can partner with HR on it and have a line in the budgets.
There you go.
Okay.
Well done.
Ways to optimize, right? So next one is infrastructure that we're going to talk about. And, we talked about SaaS, and that's the delivery of these applications, but cloud infrastructure's a different component. So let's talk about that.
Yeah, sure. So again, some of it is obviously very similar to software as a service, but this is talking about moving your entire infrastructure, right? So again, removing that component, removing an on-prem infrastructure alleviates the IT director of so many decisions they have to make, so much worry that they have to be concerned with. But also, when you move your infrastructure to the cloud, this gives your user base more accessibility. And this is very, very important, and has already come up a lot post-pandemic, for so much remote users, right? So a cloud infrastructure just enhances more and more the firm's abilities to allow employees to work remotely. That increases a talent base and a talent pool for the industry if they're interested in increasing their their employee base. There are some security things again that you need to think about in that situation, but certainly the accessibility component is one of the reasons I feel a move to a cloud infrastructure is the way to go. On top of that, I've been dealing a lot with other clienteles planning their disaster recovery, and this is another way to kind of assist with that move. Makes it a little bit easier for clients to plan out a disaster recovery scenario. And there is, again, kind of a cost component where a disaster recovery situation can be a little cheaper with a cloud infrastructure. And then even if there is the move from maybe utilizing one cloud carrier, like a Microsoft or whatever, you can either work within Microsoft and have a disaster recovery component within that same one, or you can potentially move to a different cloud carrier, so you don't have the quote unquote all eggs in one basket. But still, there's an ease to that that takes away, again, another layer of worry, concern, something that an IT director has to worry about when they have an on-prem or a data center DR scenario. So and then obviously some of the things we've already talked about with software as a service, the cost and the cost certainty, the security that's now again put upon on the third party, the Microsofts or whoever it might be, that you're moving this infrastructure into the cloud. But one other thing I'd like to touch on as well is when you have an on-prem server infrastructure, you have to do more to keep those servers cool, right? So there's a higher utility use. So that's another reason to move your infrastructure into the cloud. Not only will it decrease, utility worries, things that you have to be concerned of. Is the AC working properly? Does your building have the AC going on at all times? Do I need to add an additional AC unit into that server room? The costs of those utilities, but also, now your company is becoming a greener and more conservation friendly when you do things like moving to the cloud. So these are the thoughts with moving your infrastructure into the cloud.
Yeah, and the one thing before we go to the next slide to also touch on and why it's so important, again, I go back to not being in a bubble and being partnered with the business, is that if you're opening new offices or moving an office, that is the perfect time to take a look and consider a move to the cloud, because oftentimes there's no point in moving outdated or equipment you may be having to replace soon anyway, so that you move it once and then you replace it. Oftentimes making that switch to the cloud before moving that office can be the right time, because then you can save on the cost of having to remove and rebuild the infrastructure in a new location. And then also it just provides more flexibility as you're opening more offices or locations across the United States. So just
Absolutely.
understanding what the business is doing, and the cloud might not always be right, but it is a case as part of this budgeting process to know what the business is going to be doing, and then determining, does it justify a shift from an infrastructure strategy perspective.
Yeah, that's a fantastic point. I'm actually going through that exercise right now with another client, and that's exactly the scenario that they're going through. They're going to be moving their office at the end of 2023. They have a lot of an on-prem infrastructure right now. So the exercise I'm going through with them is assessing what applications they have that can potentially be moved into that software as a service situation, what can be done as far as infrastructure that can be moved to the cloud, and then what are the cost benefits? Would it be more beneficial to upgrade their current situation, or is it better to instead move it into the cloud? So that is a perfect scenario and a perfect time to make that assessment into potentially moving the infrastructure into the cloud.
Perfect. And so next we'll give a couple of prioritizing, optimizing.
Yeah, so we kind of touched on this already a little bit, especially that second bullet point, evaluating your current hardware life cycles, right? That flows right into what we just discussed with, the potential move into a new office. But move or no move, this is a perfect time to take a look into what you have. Is this a good time? Is the infrastructure, on-prem infrastructure, older, and it's a good time to make that move anyway? Is it not quite the time yet, and that's okay? Then you can instead think about budgeting for, and coming up with a roadmap to make that plan to move the infrastructure in a few years, as opposed to in 2023, if your current on-prem infrastructure is not really quite yet in that kind of too old space to make this move. So so these are some of the reasons where, some of the ways that you would prioritize and optimize the situation for potentially moving the infrastructure into the cloud. And then the last point is we have here, you already have the infrastructure in the cloud possibly. Where can you optimize the current existing environment? That's another great point, actually, is, I'm sure that a lot of the other services, have the same thing. I know with Microsoft and your MS365 portal, there's many different advances that can be done, not just, the kind of standards like email and moving your file system into a OneDrive SharePoint situation. They have other components, and some of them are included within your MS 365 licensing as you have it. Power BI can assist you with automating some, manual processes and then making your staff that much more productive. And the list kind of goes on. Again, in the security space, MS365 has certain things for, as you mentioned earlier, mobile device management, and the like. So just kind of emphasizing that point. If you are already in the cloud, there are other ways to optimize your existing cloud environment.
Yep, no, that's a perfect point, and brings us into the next topic of is taking a look at other resources and areas that you can utilize to find those cost optimizations, et cetera. And you were touching on the Microsoft 365 suite. I think adding on top of that is, Teams as an example, and it's not right for all organizations, but some organizations we've seen convert to Teams calling or other UCaaS type of solutions, but it's an example of you're moving, from that desk phone that's on your desk, which these days many are putting in corporate museums. I don't know, because they're becoming dinosaurs. But, the transition of, the desk phone is now, it's UCaaS, and Teams is a calling platform that works for some organizations. That's within the 365 suite. So tying those two together of how businesses are changing through SaaS-based applications and more utilizing, the tools that you have can deliver economies of scale and cost savings.
Yeah, that's definitely is funny, but it is a trend right now. Is getting away from kind of the standard telephony solutions that used to be. That's becoming more and more computer based. Less concerned with, like you said, like a VoIP, even a VoIP, which is fairly new, handheld device, and more, it's all going to a computer-based solution, and utilizing things like Teams for your telephony. It's just an interesting trend that is certainly up and coming.
Yeah, and then the other one we have on here, mobility management services. So in previous conversations, we've talked about how organizations switch to BYOD and the potential savings that delivers. On the flip side, we have hundreds, if not thousands, of clients that still have corporate devices. And so there's the ability through managed mobility services to go out and to optimize, calculate your spend on those devices so that you can go back, and it's a service we provide, negotiate with the Verizons or the Sprints or the others of the world to A, get more buying power, and then B, also find devices that aren't in use. And, one device not in use that you're paying for might not seem like it's a lot, but multiply that. And quickly we are finding that companies can find, pockets of resources and dollars that, if they turn them off, can be used in other ways.
Yeah. So, you're talking budgets, obviously, and finding those kind of unused devices, but I'm going to shift a bit to security, and using mobile management services allows you the ability to kind of restrict what applications are used on a corporate basis, on a corporate infrastructure, and what aren't. You can put kind of policies and procedures in place on these devices to ensure that your intellectual property and your firm is protected. Now there's a lot more on the kind of location side. So if the device is traveling into an area, or a country for that matter, that you don't want it to, that kind of locks it down and ensures that it will not, come back infected. So there's a lot more to mobile management services, other than, the potential cost savings, but also, the security highlights as well, advantages.
Yeah, absolutely. Next up, Unless, do you want to backups and DR? You touched on that
Sure,
a
we could
bit,
talk
but
about it a little bit. I mean, I think I've kind of already talked about it a little bit, but obviously, backups are still a very important way to, keep your data, keep your intellectual property safe and secure. Just ensures that, not just from a cybersecurity perspective, but from the end user perspective, when one of your employees makes a mistake or something like that, and they want to go back a step or two or a day or two, backups are essential in assisting with that and keeping your company productive. And of course, disaster recovery. I mean, disaster recovery, actually, I'm glad we're touching on this. I mean, thinking about, unfortunately, knock on wood, what's happening in Florida and soon to be Georgia, I'm sure that those firms are already, and at least I hope so, already kind of thinking about, what they're going to do in the case of, some sort of production downtime, building issue, thing of that nature. So, having disaster recovery thoughts, disaster recovery plans. This is something that my team does for Data Prize and assists clientele with that planning and process. But if that's an area that you haven't thought about spending in the past, it is certainly something that you should think about budgeting for in 2023.
yeah, and then adding on to that and coming back to the Microsoft 365, one misconception that we often find clients have or organizations have is that Microsoft's backing up my data. And so it's often like a gap that can be easily addressed relatively economically, but to
Correct.
back up users' Microsoft 365 data so that they have it, because that is not done by default by Microsoft.
So, and another point is backups are not disaster recovery, right? They're two separate things, obviously. So, so just because your infrastructure is in the cloud, just because, like you mentioned, you may have backups through Microsoft or whichever platform you go through, that's not the same as having a disaster recovery plan. So you have to ensure that when your infrastructure goes down, certain applications are down. What is your business continuity process? What's your disaster recovery plan? It's something certainly you should be thinking about and again budgeting for.
And each one of these demonstrates why it can be such an educational and a negotiating process for IT to explain to business leaders why these investments are critical to supporting and driving the business forward. So next up, we have outsourcing and insourcing and what we're seeing people doing with these.
Yeah, so just again in terms of budgeting and in terms of maybe a cost savings, there are a lot of my clients out there that are outsourcing not just IT services through Data Prize or but also obviously the cybersecurity comes through managed service providers as well. My team at Data Prize, we do the CEIO or strategic advisory function, you could call it, and that's not just for recurring Data Prize clients, but if anyone had a need for some sort of strategic advisory projects, we'd be happy to assist with that. But there are other ways that outside of IT that groups are looking to outsource and become more cost effective and cost scalable. Obviously, legal, HR, those are things that have kind of been done already in the past. But what I found interesting was like administrative services, just administrative assistants even are now being utilized in a because of how remote companies have become and employees have become. This is something that can be utilized on an outsourced basis as well, is administrative services and administrative assistance. And again, it's all a matter of aligning your group, your IT needs with the business goals. What's where is the business pointing to? What is their kind of modus operandi, and how can IT assist with that?
And our final point here, we're coming back around to selling your budget. We put in CFO, but pretty much business leadership. How do you negotiate and get approval for the things that you need?
Yeah, so I've heard at times for some reason, the CIO, the CTO, IT directors, and the CFO, so sometimes can be in some sort of a almost an adversarial relationship, and that's obviously not going to assist the company as a whole. So the bullet point here: build a relationship with your CFO. Make him or her your friend, right? I mean, you're all both working for the same team. You're all in the same company. And to that point of building a relationship, kind of try to put yourself in their shoes and see, why they might think differently from you as far as trying to get a particular initiative passed or, an entire budget passed. Because when you kind of put yourself into what they're thinking as well, that can assist you with explaining your side of it and why you feel these particular initiatives are important to the business, because that's really what it is. It's not it's not a personal thing. It's more a matter of just making sure that this is important to the business as a whole. We talked a little bit about some key terms earlier, right? CapEx and OpEx, and if you can talk a little bit in the CFO language, I think that's helpful in the quote unquote negotiating process as well. And as we put here, know their preferences. Some of them, kind of like the cost certainty of a month to month, where others prefer to own something, and so they're willing to take on the expenditure of having that ownership. Know what your CFO's preference is, and if it's different from yours, it still will assist you in explaining again why you feel the way you feel, even though it might be different from what they're thinking. And obviously partner with them, right? Work with them when more budget is needed as a split. Basically, with it's a partnership. So again, as I said earlier, you're all on the same team. You're all just doing what you can for the company. You all want the best for the company. You want to move the company in the same direction. So make it a partnership where you're both working together to get to that end goal that will help the business as a whole.
Perfect. And it brings us back to where we started of not operating in a bubble and recognizing, we say CFO here, but it's those business leaders, the executives across the company that you need to partner with, not just at this time for budgeting, but throughout the full process, so that you're rowing in the same direction. And you may not always end up in the same place, but you're in the general vicinity supporting the same goals of the organization. So perfect. And that brings us, as we said, we were going to finish with selling it to the internal stakeholders. So that is a wrap on this webinar. Tom, thanks for joining me, and thanks to everyone who joined us. We will send out a copy of the recording, the slides, and some follow-up resources will be hitting your inboxes within 24 hours. So thank you, Tom, and thank you to our attendees.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.